Very wonderful. Good evening. Welcome. It is 5:30 p.m. and I'm calling today's meeting of October 1st, 2024 to order. May we please have the roll call?
Chair Nelson,
Present.
Vice Chair Rivenow,
Here.
Member Hanson, here, Member Bachman,
Here.
Member Hare,
Present.
Member Lindsay,
Here.
and Member
Mashka
Nashka Hitchcock.
here.
Thank you. The forum.
Great, thank you so much. Now we have a special presentation, which is a public integrity ordinance discussion being presented by City Attorney Jim Priest. Welcome, Jim.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board, and members of staff and the public. Jim Priest, Best and Krieger. It's a pleasure being with you tonight. Yeah, usually you see me on the Planning Commission meetings, but Mr. Ballinger asked me to come and visit you this evening and go over the public integrity ordinance of the city. I kind of wanted to address it sort of in the backdrop of the various laws and regulations that govern the board's participation in hearings that come before it. As most of you, I'm sure, are aware, there's the General Political Reform Act conflicts of interest. I'm sure you guys have heard about that and worked those through in the past. When you have a Political Reform Act conflict, which is a business interest of $2,000 or more in the application, you own real property of $2,000 or more within 500 feet of the applicant's site. If it affects an income interest of yours, up to $500 or more, and that could be a positive or negative income effect of the decision. Gifts from the applicant can be an issue, or any other direct effect on your personal finances of the decision. Those can trigger a Political Reform Act conflict of interest. And when one of those occurs, you are obligated to disclose that conflict of interest on the record. You don't have to get into massive detail, but you do have to disclose that I do have a financial conflict, or I own property within 500 feet, etc. And the Fair Political Practices Commission, which implements the Political Reform Act, has said that when you disclose and then disqualify, you need to leave the room. You cannot be present. That's still considered participating in the decision for which you're conflicted. So there's some very specific circumstances under the Political Reform Act where you would have to disclose an interest and then disqualify yourself by recusing, and then you would have to leave the room. That's the baseline under state law that all agencies in the state have to follow. Then we have the city's public integrity ordinance, and the city's public integrity ordinance goes above and beyond what the Political Reform Act provides. The public integrity ordinance was originally adopted in 2018, and what it did was it addressed potential conflicts of interest. If you, even though you may not be earning a salary, you may not be getting money, you may not have a financial interest, if you sit on a board, governing board of a charity, a nonprofit, then that can give rise to a conflict of interest. Now, originally the ordinance said, if you sit on the governing body of a nonprofit or a charitable organization that had an application before the city body that you also sit on, then you would have to disclose and you would have to recuse. That has since been broadened. So if you sit on a board, and this was in 2021, there were some very recent amendments, and I believe I was told that Mr. Ballinger's office did send the board a memorandum dated January 20th of 2022 that talked about these updates to the public integrity ordinance. And what it does is it broadens its coverage. It broadens the categories that could require disclosure and a disqualification from rendering a decision. Again, if you're on the governing board of a nonprofit or a charity, even without compensation, that was already within the public integrity ordinance. If you serve as an accountant or an attorney, even without compensation for that nonprofit, or if you're a trustee for a charitable trust, any of those classifications, if you hold that office or that function with the private nonprofit, then if that nonprofit has an issue, has a matter before a city board or city commission, like the Historic Site Preservation Board, and that nonprofit has an interest in that application, not just they are the applicant, but it's been brought in now. If they have an interest in that application, then that triggers disclosure and disqualification by recusal from participating in that decision. So, and it doesn't have to be a financial interest either. It could be some examples. Say you are on the board of a nonprofit that's looking to develop a property in the future for a headquarters or something, and the city council or another board like the planning commission is considering some sort of a general plan amendment that might make that new headquarters building undevelopable because it would be out of the proper designation. This new ordinance would cover you sitting on that nonprofit board being potentially affected by this separate application, by the separate process. And therefore, if you were a planning commissioner or if it came before this historic board, you would have to disclose and disqualify. It's a pretty broad coverage that this public integrity ordinance covers. I do note that the way the ordinance reads, if you do disclose and then disqualify, you don't have to leave the room. If it's a political reform act conflict, you got to leave the room. The FPPC has been very clear. We, as a matter of best practice, do advise that even if you're in the room, let's not do like thumbs up, let's not do big nods or shake your head this way or something like that. But you can still be present and observe the proceedings. You just can't participate in the discussion on the dais or help render a decision on that one. Now, the memorandum that the city attorney's office sent did clarify that just because you may sit on a nonprofit board and that nonprofit may have an interest in an application before this board, the Historic Site Preservation Board, that may require you to disclose and disqualify, but it doesn't prevent other people in your organization from coming and speaking out. You just would have to not participate in the decision on that. The violation is subject to administrative fines. That's provided in the ordinance. However, I will note that there is a cure provision in the public integrity ordinance. So in the event that, say, a member of this board should find out later on, oh, I should have disclosed, I should not have participated in this decision, there is a cure provision that lets you within 30 days come back, disclose, and say you're recusing yourself, and that will not necessarily invalidate the decision. And it will also not subject you to fines if you do it for the one time. Future violations of the ordinance could subject a board member to administrative fines. To my knowledge, that's not happened yet, but it is in the ordinance. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. Then I wanted to get to a third issue concerning rendering decisions. And this is the issue of bias, actual or apparent bias. And this exists separately in the court case law from the Political Reform Act and from the Public Integrity Ordinance. As a historic board, you act in a quasi-judicial capacity. That's what we call that in law. What that basically means is, in contrast to a legislative capacity, which the city council acts as, when they are making policy, are we going to adopt a cannabis ordinance? Are we going to set a different policy in the city? That's a legislative capacity. The Planning Commission, the Historic Site Preservation Board, and the other subordinate boards and commissions in the city do not act in a legislative, they act in a quasi-judicial capacity, which means you are taking a specific application with specific facts and you are applying the city's law to that. So rather than acting like a legislator, you're acting like a judge. And when you act like a judge, due process requires that you render an unbiased decision. And the legal standard is not just actual bias. The legal standard is there cannot be an unacceptable probability of actual bias. So if you have a decision that's rendered by a board or commission, and there is a probability, an unacceptable probability that there was some actual bias, even if the plaintiff didn't prove it, that there was an actual bias here, that there was just a very strong appearance of it, then that may be enough to challenge a decision of this board on the basis of bias. The trick with this one is that one biased decision maker can set aside an entire decision. One biased decision maker can basically taint the entire decision. So we do have to be mindful of these issues. Now, where bias can come up most often is, there's personal bias, there can be financial bias, but where it comes up most often is when a member of a city board or commission is out in the public expressing basically prejudgment of a case. That's where we really need to be mindful about the bias issue. Like I said, you act in a quasi-judicial capacity, which means just like a judge can't go out in public and comment on, well, I think the case should be decided this way, or I think a judge would not do that. A judge would limit him or herself in the courtroom to the facts presented in evidence at the hearing. And that's your job as Historic Site Preservation Board members, is to hear each case on its merits based on the facts and the law presented at a hearing before you, and not based on any other information out there. So if somebody, the case law that talks about bias, the people that tended to cross that line were ones who had written emails or had gone out and made public statements saying, there's no way I will approve this, or I absolutely will approve this no matter what. Those kind of statements that show a prejudgment before the hearing should be avoided, because those can really open up the city to a claim of bias. And again, can overturn decisions. There's case law that says that somebody can sue to invalidate a decision on the basis that there's even just one biased decision maker on the board. So that's basically the rules about avoiding conflicts of interest, making sure that there's neutral, fair decision making on the board, and when you have to disclose, when you have to disqualify. I hope that didn't go too long. I just wanted to be brief in my comments here, and I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have. I also want to make you aware that we're standing by. We're available to the board just as we are to the Planning Commission and to the City Council. So if any of these conflict questions, public integrity ordinance, or bias questions should come up, feel free to reach out. You can reach us through Chris Hadwin or through Sarah Yoon, and they know how to get a hold of us, and we field these questions all the time. So we're happy to assist if you happen to have any situations and you're not quite sure, do I have to disclose and recuse, or can I still participate? How do I do that? So again, we're available and we're happy to help on your requests. And with that, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. We appreciate your time. I think this would be a helpful thing to have at the beginning of each term, each year, because there's always new members that come on, I think in July, typically. So just for future reference.
Okay, well, we're happy to come back in a year and give you guys the summary of these rules again, and maybe things might change with next year or the coming years. We'll see. But yeah, we're happy to do an annual update if you'd like. And thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I just might, to the point that you just made, I think it's a really good point, and I think this question has been raised by multiple boards and commissions with the city, and I think the City Council is also evaluating our overall conflict of interest policies, and they're looking at putting together some training material, specifically in response to the point you just made, and I think it's something that you're right, we should be doing at the beginning of each term, and so thank you for the feedback, and we'll certainly look to do that.
Thank you, Chris. Do you have anything to add?
No, thank you, Jim, for attending our meeting and giving us a very brief but detailed one on that. And again, if we have any sort of questions, please feel free to forward those to us and we can forward it over to the attorney's office and get feedback as quickly as possible. So thank you.
Great, and Jim did say if we have any questions for him at this time, to bring those up. Does anyone have a question, urgent need that they can't address with staff later on? No? Okay, great. Thank you again for your time. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. You all have a good evening.
Take good care.
Thank you.
Okay, that was informative as always. Thank you, staff, for making sure we are up to date on our public integrity ordinance. All right, so moving along, maybe please have a staff report.
Right before our staff, the posting of the agenda, I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce our planning director. We had David Knowles' departure last meeting, and today we have our planning director, Chris Hadwin, joining us today. I don't think he's met everyone on the board. I think some he's met at other capacities with different boards, but I would like to introduce Chris Hadwin, who is the planning director for the city of Palm Springs. Introduction.
I don't need to, we'll keep your business moving, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Just hello to everyone and to those that I haven't met yet. Thank you so much for your service to the city. Sorry that I didn't make it here previously to introduce myself other than when I ran in here when we were having the Zoom issues, but I'm happy to be joining and to meet you all and looking forward to a good meeting. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Chris. All right, so moving along. Is that okay? Are we moving along? Maybe have a staff report on the posting of the agenda.
Yes, of course. So the agenda for the meeting was posted for public review at the City Hall's bulletin board and the west side of City Council chambers, and in the planning department in accordance with the city's policies.
Right, thank you. Does the board have any revision? Nope, okay. Being none, may I please have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move.
Great, we have a motion by Vice Chair Rose now. Do I have a second, please?
I'll second.
And a second by member Hare. Any discussion? Okay, great. I'll call for the question. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No, motion passes 7-0. All right, now we have public comment. And it's time to set aside for members of the public to address our board on agenda item and items of general interest within our jurisdiction. Although we value your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, the Historic Site Preservation Board generally cannot take action on items not listed on the agenda. There will be 3 minutes for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings will be taken at the time of those hearings. Has anyone requested to comment on a non-public hearing item today?
We have not received any additional comments.
Okay, great.
Do you know,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that we have 2 members online, so if you are wishing to speak at this point in the agenda on non-agenda items, please raise your hand. I see no raised hands.
Nope, okay. Anyone in our audience wishing to speak on public comment if it's not related to a public hearing? No? Okay, great, wonderful. Being none, we will close that portion of the agenda and proceed to our next item, which is the consent calendar, where we have 1 item today, the draft minute from our last meeting, September 3rd, 2024. Does anyone have any comments on the minute or wish for any item on the consent calendar?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. So just 2 things. One is that my name is misspelled every place it appears. And then I would also request that my dissent of the Merrill Lynch resolution be noted in the minutes.
Sorry, so go back to the minutes.
The resolution, the Merrill Lynch resolution to approve the Merrill.
Let me see what it is.
Oh.
Right. Let me see what it is.
I think given that you weren't here in person under the Brown Act, you're unable to register a dissent or a vote in any capacity because the Brown Act does require that you be here in person as a member of this board.
It can't be registered in the board member comments or the staff comments or public comment.
Not in your official capacity as a board member.
Can it be registered in public comment?
I think we would have to perhaps talk to our attorneys about that, given the conflict of interest conversation that we just had.
Okay. Right.
Anyone else? Member Hanson, please.
I had on page 2, this was with regard to I made the motion for the Merrill Lynch building. And I think I also recommended, which is not in here, to not include the palm trees along Palm Canyon in the right of way. So, and you got that? Yes. And then on discussions under my comments, it says member Hanson requested a city initiate. I requested a consideration of a city initiative because I don't think we can say you have to do this.
Any further comment from the board? I just have a general comment. I would just like to thank staff and whoever typed up these minutes for including a little more detail in the board member comment section as we had requested. That is much appreciated. Thank you. All right, so seeing no further discussion on that, may I have a motion to approve the draft minutes with the discussion that's been considered?
I so move.
I have a motion by member Hare to approve. Do I have a second?
I second.
And member Hanson seconding. Any further discussion on that? No? Okay, I'll call for the question. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Mr. Chair, I abstain, I was absent.
I'm sorry?
I abstain, I was
Oh,
absent.
thank you very much. Sorry about that, member. So, 6-4, 1 abstention. So motion passes 6-1. All right, I think we're ready to move along. So we're now at the number 2 item of our agenda, which is public hearings. And item 2A is request by Larry Yashaber for historic site designation of the Ratner residence located at 1633 Via Roberto Miguel. It's a PB number 161. And member Rose now.
Mr. Chair, I need to recuse myself. I'm on the board of the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation, and I am acknowledged in the nomination, so.
Okay, we appreciate that recusal, and if
I will
you-
leave the table. May I sit in the last row, or do I have to leave the room?
As a recusal for a non FPCC. For a recusal of a non FPCC item, you are able to sit in the audience and observe as long as you're not giving us the thumbs up.
Making face.
Thanks for that clarification. All right, so maybe please have the staff report.
So the public item here, or public hearing item that we have before the board today is the HSC phase 161 request for historic site designation of the Ratner. As you can see in the recent aerial view, the single family home is an internalized lot. It's located on Via Roberto Miguel in the R1C zone district. This is an owner initiated application and they are requesting class 1 site designation. The original placement of the home is quite distanced and recessed from the front property line, and there's a wall that surrounds the front of the home, making it a little difficult to see from the street. However, the front elevation of the home, as you see in this recent photograph, and as everyone has seen on the site visits, is well maintained, and much of the original character-defining features of the home on the front and side remain intact. As described in the Historic Resources Report, this subdivision is the first residential tract home development designed by Wexler Harris. The home was designed during that first phase of the development in El Rancho Vista Estates. Utilizes a design approach which combines 3 floor plans and 3 roof lines and the variation between the site placement that makes up the neighborhood. The features of the home certainly identified with the mid-century modern style of architecture and incorporated modern amenities for that period, like air conditioning and built-in cables for television and telephones, which were quite new for that time period in the late 1950s, early 60s. All of the homes also incorporated a masonry block wall using a newly trademarked concrete masonry unit, CMU unit, that provided a decorative element to the facades of these homes. In the case of the Ratner residence, you can see on the rightmost image, a close-up of the variation of repeating triangles that give that wall a very distinctive and almost sculptural quality. In the report itself, it elaborates on how the neighborhood was initially promoted and opened in the 1960s. And there is a very high resolution image of 1965 that's in the report that shows the subdivision and its surroundings as it relates to the open space, and you can see the original residential pattern of the neighborhood. The blue arrow, it's pretty big, but you can see the blue arrow at the top left-hand corner, and it locates where the Ratner residence is located on that 1965 aerial map. When you compare the existing conditions to today, the overall layout of the subdivision is consistent. There is an expansion that was made towards the southwest of the subdivision that you see there in that 1965 image. But the subdivision actually abuts the undeveloped tribal land to the north and west. The north and west, which still exists today. So much of that pattern is still intact. So based on the report and the site visits, we first evaluated the site against the 7 criteria for historical significance. The home meets criteria 3, 4, and 5. The home was built in the post-World War II period where both growth and prosperity allowed the city to embrace and try new ideas related to design and development. The mid-century modern style of architecture is how it incorporated and how it incorporates itself into the desert landscape. It was a promotion of a new type of leisurely lifestyle in the desert. And it also incorporates the concept of mass-produced residential tract development. So there's a lot of things that were incorporated into this time period under criterion 3. We also see that there's a use of concrete masonry units, or the CMUs, specifically the trademarked CMU that the report delves a little bit deeper into. We have 2 that were listed specifically in the report itself, where you have building materials that are emerging through this time period that embody distinctive characteristics that support a new method of construction and a new method of design even. And so we see that being utilized in these houses in this particular development and in this particular home. Lastly, the design of the home within the subdivision is directly related to the prolific architects Wexler and Harrison. The firm was in charge of creating the design identity of this residential neighborhood. And as we had read in the report, Harrison certainly continues down that path on residential development, while Wexler starts to focus a bit more on civic and commercial projects. But both of their careers are very influenced by this design exercise, and we see a lot of characteristics from this development in their works later on. And we see the use of new building materials and how they work with those materials, the glass, posting, construction. There are lots of characteristics we see that are identified throughout their work. In terms of the integrity of the Ratner residence, it meets most of the listed topics here. While there are some changes that were made to the property, such as the wall that was built around the property, the swimming pool, and the decking surrounding it. There is some replacement of fenestration towards the rear of the property. Despite all of these changes that were listed, much of the original features remain intact. The carport remains unenclosed, there's original hardware and fenestration, patterns and glazing on the primary facade, so a lot of those important character defining features remain intact, and the integrity, as a result, the integrity also remains intact. In more detail, the character defining features are listed on this slide as well as in your draft resolution. While the interior layout of the home is not under HSDB purview, the Bermuda floor plan, in terms of the building's footprint and the carport and its relationship to the rest of the home will remain intact, with the gabled roof line reflects the original design. In terms of the non-original features, we have the swimming pool, like I mentioned earlier, the glass block bump out that we saw on the west elevation during the site visit. And then the walls that were actually installed between the columns and the carport. Those were some of the changes that we saw on that site visit as well. Overall, these changes were minimal, done in a way that does not significantly alter the overall design intent of the home. In conclusion, the historic resources report, in the context of the period, all of these things are detailed in that report. The site visits reveal the correct conditions and the integrity of the existing, home. Staff finds that the property again meets criteria 3, 4, and 5 and retains sufficient integrity to be reclassified as a class 1 landmark site. And recommends HSDB adopt the draft resolution that is attached. With that, I can take questions of the staff report. We also have the owner Larry, who is here today. He's actually been attending many of our meetings, waiting eagerly to see his application be reviewed by the board. And I believe Elon is also here, who has written this fantastic report for us. So they are here to answer any questions related to the report.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Does the board have any questions for staff at this time?
I just have one question, which is, could you clarify what particularly or specifically you mean by the site design of the in the as a contributing feature?
Yeah, so I think at one point we kind of wanted to incorporate site design, if the integrity still lies there, to be identified as character defining feature. In this instance, the home retains its original location, the footprint remains intact. If there are any sort of other features related to the site, those would be included, but in this instance, it would be the nature of the footprint being intact, the location being its original location.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay. Seeing none, I would like to invite the applicant team up to the table, please. Please state your full name.
Good evening, I'm Stephen Keelan, from the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation, and I wrote the report.
Thank you.
And I'm Larry Archiever, I'm the owner of the home, and honored to be here.
Great, wonderful. Okay, so we would like to give you 3 minutes each, if you like. Sure.
I just think this is a really interesting subdivision. I was only a little bit aware of it, having visited one of the houses there, but getting to learn more about it, I was really intrigued by it. And some important players, Roy Fay, who came to the desert just a couple years earlier and was very important in developing Palm Springs through the subsequent decades. and of course Wexler and Harrison, and this was their first real sort of mass-produced subdivision, you know, along the lines of the Alexanders. I think they were inspired by what the Alexanders were doing with Kreisel and Palmer Kreisel. And here you see the way the houses are sited is so sort of ingenious that there are 3 basic floor plans and 4 different roof lines, but the way that they're alternating and on the site, it really gives a lot of variety compared to some of the other tract housing developments. And the creative use of really simple materials like this newly developed shadow wall and shadow block material, and then going even further, just using off the shelf cement block and finding sort of ingenious ways to make it, each house have its own unique character. And, you know, it's wonderful to see a house that has even you know, the original aluminum frame sliding glass doors intact, and though there are some changes there in the back of the house, they don't really impact the presence, the integrity that you see from the street or when you visit it. And if you have any questions, I'll answer them now, or I'll turn it over to Larry.
Did anyone have questions for Mr. Keeling, who wrote the application? No, well, hold your feet. Okay, here's the guy. Larry.
Well, it's been many years since I've been sitting waiting for an award to come my way. Probably my high school track banquet was the last time. So, but I do want to say that Mid-Century has been kind of an immersion, probably a submersion of mine for many years. I was born in Inglewood, California, and I grew up in many dingbat apartments in Los Angeles that LA is known for. You know, very iconic, but also very ugly. A lot of people consider. But I do want to say that, you know, I think 2020 during COVID is when I finally decided to splurge, take the plunge, move out here to Palm Springs. And instead of just going to open houses for 20 years and looking at mid-century homes, actually buy mine. So I did that. And fortunately, with the 2 years we all had impacted by COVID, I was able to, oh my gosh, I started to redesign the home in my vision, which was much more atomic and jet age. And so I had a lot of fun here in Palm Springs purchasing consignment items, buying them at eBay, adapting things from Wayfair, and just having a blast. So COVID was a fun time for me out here in Palm Springs. But it was a real honor to find Stephen. And I think when I first found him, he was working on the personal residence of Donald Wexler. So he was immersed in it, and he said it was really good timing. And so, you know, I was patient with him, patient with you guys, and I believe that good things come with patience a lot of times. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Larry. We so appreciate your zeal and enthusiasm for your house. And I know that you started thinking about this process in 2022, and even undertook the writing determination as early as the beginning of 2023. But we know this has been a long process for you, so we truly appreciate your patience. And we're so glad we're here today to finally hash it all out. So if the board doesn't have any questions for Larry, we will go ahead and proceed. Okay, wonderful. All right, so I guess the action is now officially with the board for general discussion of the application question.
Mr. Board, Mr. Chair, I
I'm
might
sorry.
just first, once again, pull the 2 members of the public that are online to make sure we don't have any public comments.
Oh, sure.
So if you are online, I see 2 people and you wish to speak on this item, please raise your hand now. And I will allow you to talk. Okay, thank you.
No members of the public wishing to speak at this time, so thank you for that. All right, now it's open to the board. Now it's open to the board. Any comment, question? Member Hampton, please.
I just have a few comments. Good ones. Don't. Just wanted to thank Larry for being a steward of that house. I think it's important for us, really, at almost any, especially single family residence nominations, to thank people for being good stewards of their home. I also wanted to compliment the pair of the nominations. It was so thorough, boy, oh boy. get your money's worth, I'll tell you. And you know, I was thinking, I was really, this whole section on the shadow wall highlighting the block was just really fun to read, and I think you have a little mini publication there just on that. Would be a really nice compliment to Ron and Barbara Marshall's concrete screen block. So just throwing that out there to the universe. And I also just wanted to mention, which I'm not sure if we talked about that, but you addressed it in the report that the El Rancho Vista Estates was identified by the citywide survey as a historic district. And sometimes, you know, individual properties don't necessarily make it, it depends on the district. I'm not suggesting that in this case, but I certainly think that, you know, a couple of things. One is that this was the first tract, right, of the architecture team. And then it's also was the first phase of the three. So I think that's really important in terms of looking at them individually. And then there may be the fact that it never gets designated as a historic district, you know, if you don't have enough people who are interested in doing that. So at least we have a representation of one of the properties from what I think is a really important historic district. So I think for those reasons, let me look over I think those were my comments and I support the nomination.
Member Hicks.
I just wanted to say also, what a pleasure it was to actually read this report. And how well it was written and just how much it supported the site visit that we were privileged to see of the house, which is a marvel. So obviously I support this.
I actually did have one recommendation. I was wondering whether we could include as a character defining feature, particularly under criterion 3, that as a feature, the location within the Bartley tract. I think that part of, you know, one of the character defining features of this home is that it's within this tract that was eligible for historic district. So it's like, for example, if he wanted to take it out and move it somewhere, which probably is never going to happen. But, you know, that would be a consideration that you're taking it out of its original location. It actually contributes. It's not always the case with architecture. You can sometimes move a building outside. If it's purely significant for its architecture, it'll still have those qualities in a different location. But I think this ties it to criterion C in the pattern of history from the post-war period and tract housing.
Thank you, Member Anthony. Anything else there?
No.
Anyone else?
I would just like to second to agree that I really enjoyed reading the application, and especially the shadow wall block section was really fascinating, and I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you. And no other?
I guess I'll say something.
Okay, Peter.
I think it's important that outside of the Alexanders and the work that Paul McChrysal did, it's good that there are other developers and of course important architects that are being acknowledged now, because it's not all Alexander at the time. And so this is a good opportunity to do that, and another reason why the district concept really should be pursued if possible.
Thank you. And just a few comments. First, I would like to acknowledge that Eric Rosenau used to live in El Rancho Vista Estate, and as a prior resident there for a long time, he did a lot of preliminary research, and that informed the greater research that had been done behind this report. So we're most appreciative of that, even though he's not up here with us at this time. I thought that was important to call that out. Also, Roy Fay's first development was Caballeros Estate, which, for those of you who don't know, is located on the west side of Caballeros, roughly between Ruth Hardy Park and Alejo Road. And there's a subdivision of about 27 homes there. I'm not sure if all 27 were built, but that was Roy Fay's first development, and Weston Harrison was the architect. When I was in high school, we lived at 641 North Camino Real, which was the home of Tony Curtis and Janet Lee. And it was a very fun house to live in, and it had all of the similar contributing element and character defining features as the song that I went to with state. So going to Larry's house, I was like, oh my gosh, I was reminded of that beautiful house that we lived in. And I think that this is probably the perfect first home in this particular district to get a class 1 designation, or we hope at least a nomination for now. So I would also agree that the research was incredible, and these reports never fail to amaze me. I always learn something new, at least 5 or 10 new things. So thank you for that. So with that being said, I think that we are ready to entertain a motion. Anyone? Okay, I will make the motion then, if that's okay. So I would move that we recommend designation, or recommend to City Council the designation of the Radnor resident, 1633 via Roberta Miguel, HPB number 61, with no amendments or modifications. Is everyone okay with that?
I did have the one addition to.
Oh, sure, please.
Oh, okay.
We'll include that, yes. And before we vote on that, there was one other thing that I forgot to add. At staff, it was a question I had that just popped back up. Is there a reason in particular why we deemed the period of significance just to be 1960? Just to be the year it was built? There wasn't really a justification or a reason stated why it was just that 1 year.
The 1960 date was determined by the completion date of the home, and so it was the completion date became the year of significance, and then any changes beyond that were considered alterations to the original design.
Okay, great. The reason I asked is because even though the pool was added in 1970, it feels very authentic to the home and the period. And it's so rare that we have the mid-century modern nominations that are either Wexford or Chrysler or what have you, that don't include the pool. But I guess since it wasn't built in the year of significance, we can kind of rule that out. So thank you for that. All right, so do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you, Catherine, much appreciated. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries 6-1. We have one recusal. So congratulations, Larry. Congratulations, Stephen. And thank you both. Thank you. All right. So we will move on now. Yeah, welcome back to the table. Item 3 is unfinished business, in which we have none. Item 4 is new business, which we also have none. Item 5 is discussion. So the first part of that is board member comment? Or would staff like to go first?
No, go ahead, Jennifer, it's even important.
Okay, great. Board member comment, please.
I just have a question, especially since our planning director is here. I'm just curious why this group is called a board and not a commission. And if you don't know today, maybe just, because in my mind, and this may not be true, I don't know if it's different in different cities, but I kind of consider a board subordinate to a commission. And I don't think, there's no in-between person between us and city council, which would be the same with planning commission, or you seem to have an answer, so I'm just gonna let you go.
I actually don't, so I do think it's odd. I don't know that we have other boards in our city structure. We certainly have commissions, we have committees, we have, I guess we have a couple of boards, but I would agree with you in the sense that you are, for all intents and purposes, functioning as many of our other boards. You have a specific legislative function. As Mr. Priest mentioned, you're a quasi judicial board and that you are adjudicating decisions on behalf of the city council. A number of actions end with you, a number of actions go on to the city council, much the same way that the planning commission and other boards or commissions are functioning. So I don't have a specific answer for you on why you were granted this specific name, but I can certainly look into it and we can report back.
Thank you, that would be appreciated. I think, in my experience in other cities, it was not, historic boards were not considered as important. Preservation was not as integral into the planning process as it now is in most cities. It was kind of this little sidebar thing.
Well, and I wonder if, you know, and some of you may have been here certainly longer than Sarah and I have been to remember, I don't know if that speaks to the evolution of how this board has functioned over the years and the sort of importance that we have
Yeah.
given to the board and the legislative function essentially that you've all been given over the years. And perhaps when we were first established, we were functioning in a different way than we are now. And whether there's an opportunity to reevaluate that, we can certainly look into that as well.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Moody.
I very much agree with that, and look. Oh, you changed it this time.
Yes.
I used to say commissioner. Well, my goodness,
Finally ordered.
Never mind.
my whole point has been lost. You know, I think it's rather insulting actually that we're a board and not a commission. I mean, every city I've ever been associated with or known, and so it's always a landmarks commission, so, you know, anyway. I mean, why are we a board? It's an outrage.
Any other comments at this time?
Oh, I do.
I know he started.
I shouldn't have to even ask. You know what I'm gonna ask about?
I have a few suspicions, but which one?
County Country Center. All right, thank you.
Yeah, look, I know that that's a complicated discussion, and I know that Sarah has been working really hard behind the scenes to try and move that conversation forward. It's complicated for a few reasons that I won't really get into here. Part of it is just ongoing negotiation with the property owner. And part of it is just internal city functions. So, you know, the issue of compliance and code enforcement rests with a different department than planning. And our colleagues in our code enforcement department are certainly aware of the issue. They continue to work with the property owner. And long story short, we are aware that there are concerns and issues with the maintenance of the town and country center. And we continue to work with both with our other city departments and with the property owner to resolve those. I know that's not the answer that you were looking for, and there's not a lot in that response, but that is kind of where it's at, and we continue to work with our colleagues regularly to try and address those issues. We have been in communication with the property owner, and we are working to resolve some of the issues that have been raised, certainly. And that's sort of as much as I have to say today. But I appreciate the concern, Member Marusi, and we continue to work with our colleagues, as I said.
This is an unusual one, for I guess a variety of reasons which I'm not aware of. Because I don't recall any other issue that's been raised about maintenance and disrepair and so forth that has taken this long. You know, even with the orchid tree property, I mean, that's been on the radar forever, and it's been the council, you know, constantly comments on it. So this is very odd, and it does disturb me tremendously because, you know.
There are some weird nuances in the code that are sort of at play here, and I don't want to speak to them tonight because I don't want to misrepresent anything, but there are, because of the fact that portions of the building are occupied and portions are vacant, it's falling into a bit of a disconnect in terms of how the code is applying some of our rules. And so that is an issue, that is a conversation that's underway, so I don't really want to elaborate more on that without having a fuller understanding of exactly what I mean by what I just said, but there is a lot at play here that we are working through, certainly with a number of folks to address the issues.
I see.
And ideally at a future meeting, we'll have more to say on it.
Okay, thanks.
Before I open it up to other board members, just to elaborate a little bit, not on town century, but the building similar to that, and I brought this up privately with staff, but Rocket Club obviously is in that same lease as the former community church and the Orchid Tree site. And you really have to question why, you know, the church, a class 1 site built in 1934, had a bad fire 15 years ago, And they've been allowed to just leave a hole in the roof. So all that rain over the last 15 years, all that sun, all of those elements, it's just further impacting that building and contributing to the lack of maintenance and deterioration and all of that stuff. It seems to me like, the hole in the roof should at least be covered. I mean, come on.
That seems so logical, and yet sometimes our regulations don't really operate logically, is what I would say to that, and I think there's a few different things at play in the various properties that you mentioned, but again, I think it's the layering on of various regulations that exist and the city's legal authority and ability to intervene on private property, and sort of what our regulations speak to in those. There are specific issues at play in each of those properties that we have to work through. I'll say that. What I will say is that we've been engaged with several different parties on the Racket Club site, and we're hoping that someone is moving forward with looking at rehabilitating that site. And that we continue to engage with the owner of the Orchid Tree site in looking at different ways of either restoring that building or at least stabilizing it, or moving forward with development that has been proposed for many, many years. So more to come on those, but I would say as staff, we certainly share a lot of the frustrations that you're expressing, and we're doing our best to work through them.
Thank you for that. We appreciate your candor and tenacity going forward. Anyone else?
Yes.
Catherine, please.
Thank you. I would like to, if possible, add here potentially that I disagree or would have dissented, I suppose, to the Merrill Lynch resolution as written, as it was passed. And then I also wanted to address the last meeting and reiterate that I really have enjoyed working with staff, and that I understand that it was an honest mistake, and that I was extremely frustrated, not with staff, but I was in the middle of my frustration during the meeting because I found out 3 minutes before the start of the meeting. And I was concerned that the situation made me look or appear unprepared, partly because when I submitted my notes, I didn't know that staff could only read my questions and not my comments as well. And the questions were written as rhetorical framework for my comments. So I wouldn't have sent anything if I had known that. But I'm really sorry that my frustration boiled over, and if my comments came across as rude, that was not my intention at all. And I am just very passionate about these issues, and I have really enjoyed getting to learn about them, more about them, and I'm looking forward to continuing to discuss them with you guys. So that's it. Thank you.
And if I might I wasn't here, but I did hear from David and Sarah a bit about what happened, and do want to apologize on staff's behalf for the mix-up. I think the evolving state of the Brown Act applicability and the changes that have been coming down from the state have been confusing to many of us and unclear in terms of some of these situations that have arisen. We were operating a certain way, obviously, during the pandemic. Things have shifted back. And I think we're all a little frustrated by the lack of flexibility that we're given by the state in terms of having these meetings that were functioning very well online for the most part, and wish that we had a little bit more ability to be flexible for people's schedules to have full participation even when members aren't able to be here physically. But we are bound by the state, so we are apologetic for not having a firmer sense of what those rules were prior to that meeting.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I totally understand, and I did the Brown Act training, and I didn't know, and didn't recently, right? Within the last 3 weeks prior to that meeting, and could still did not interpret that way at all. So I appreciate it and I understand. Yeah.
One second, member moves. Thank you, Catherine. We appreciate your apology, and thank you, Christopher, for your comment. Much appreciated. I will say, having been on and off this board for a total of 9 years and counting, there's certainly a learning curve when you come onto a board, and especially when you've had to go through 1 or 2 meetings and you haven't yet had the privilege to sit in a live one-on-one Brown Act training that is typically held at the convention center. Which I think we'll do for, because there's been an ever-evolving document and set of principles and rules and regulations, just like what we heard from one of the city attorneys earlier today. But we certainly understand how passion can lead to frustration, and we appreciate that. So thank you, Member Murphy.
So is it the situation that people that are members of the board cannot call in? They can watch or listen, but they cannot speak.
That's correct. You cannot participate remotely with a few exceptions. And the exception being, if you are, and I believe you have to be in the state of California. And if you, as part of the notice and the agendizing of the meeting, let's say you're at a Holiday Inn in Los Angeles, and you want to say, I, Peter Maruzzi, want to participate remotely from the Holiday Inn in Los Angeles, you have to post a notice on the door of your hotel room. We have to include it in the agenda to say the meeting will be held here in this large conference room as well as at the Holiday Inn in Los Angeles. And you have to answer the door anytime anyone knocks and wants to sit in and participate in the meeting from your hotel room. So
Putting aside those absurdities,
absolutely an option available to you, but I think it doesn't seem that much.
so putting all that stuff aside,
And it applies at all
her
levels.
writing questions, it's not appropriate to have them read, correct, into the
That's
record.
correct, because it's effectively a remote participation in a way that the Brown Act does not allow it.
So essentially, she could have monitored it, whatever, however it could be done, I guess maybe watch it on YouTube or something, but that's it.
Yes.
All right. Now I understand.
So you'd have to, sorry, so you'd have to, because I was in Florida for work. So I like, even in, like, I couldn't have been in like Florida with 72 hours notice.
I would like
More than
to
75 hours notice.
follow up with our city attorney's office on whether the state of California residency requirement
Yeah,
is true or not. I had heard that. I don't know exactly where that's landed, so we can follow up on that particular question, because if you had known you were going to be there, you're right, and let's say that that is not applicable, we could have included in the agenda. No
Yeah.
one in the state of Florida is going to show up at your location to participate, but you would have had to allow it. So we will get clarity on that so that you are aware, that everyone is aware going forward, so that you are aware of that option.
and then when I was reading, when I went back after this happened and read the Brown Act in more detail, in even more detail. It did seem like that there were exceptions for like childcare, like, or family care, illness, contagious illness. There was nothing for death in the family, anything of that nature at all.
I think there's a catch-all clause about dealing with the unforeseen or family emergency, but to be clear, those aren't to allow remote participation. Those are to excuse your absence such that we don't count it against you. There's another formula under the Brown Act about how many unexcused absences you can have from these meetings before you are essentially dismissed from the board. And so those situations, which is 2. And so essentially what it is saying is that for those instances, those would become excused absences that would not count against you.
But a death in the family wouldn't count because it's literally just childcare and like, and family, like literally taking care of a family member.
We will confirm that language. I had understood there was and you've read it more recently than me, so I'm certainly not going to disagree. I thought there was another category for unforeseen emergencies of some kind. In any event, no, it would require an affirmative action by staff and by the city council to pursue the remedies under the Brown Act to remove you. So I don't.
No,
I don't see any situation in which we would do that, but you're right. If that is a loophole, that is a loophole, and
That's allowed.
yeah.
I have ailing grandparents.
Well, tell them you can't.
So why don't we get a little more information and revisit this at the next meeting just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Okay, any further board member comments? Could you but not required, nothing? Okay, great. As usual, I do that from the behind way. So this is a little food for thought, and it kind of touches on something that's come up in a lot of our recent meetings, most notably by Member Hanson, to the discussion around integrity. And when I came across this article recently, it just floored me, because it really brings up a good issue. And so I'm going to read you just a few short paragraphs from this. And I will forward the entirety of the article to Sarah, so you can all read it on your own.
Can you
But it's
tell
fine.
us where it's from before you start reading?
Say that again?
Where it's from before you start?
I'm
reading?
just about to tell you.
Oh, okay.
So this is from Bonnie McDonald, who is the CEO of Landmarks Illinois, CEO and president. She starts out talking about building to Chicago. Obviously not Palm Springs, but still, they have a historic preservation ordinance and a commission. So she talks about buildings that are related to important people. And here we have buildings related to celebrities, architects. And some of those buildings have been vacant for 30, 40 years. As is often common in cities like Detroit, Chicago, San Francisco, New York. And there has become this whole discussion around integrity and preciousness. Preciousness. So I'm going to read you a couple of things here. It's very fascinating. And I think, you know, Palm Springs now coming into almost 40 years of having an HSPB, this is a topic that is going to become part of our lexicon and our dialogue moving forward. So not to drone on, but I just want to read you a few things and then I'll send you the full article. Conservation professionals learn that the integrity criterion measures how much original material remains to tell the story of the place is significant. Our practice assesses when these changes cross what is essentially a subjective line of when a property does or does not convey its significance. That is, if a person can or cannot understand why a place is actually historic. Inevitably, these places change over time, whether actively or passively. Someone could argue that these changes were preservation by investing in a building's material and long-term usability. To the building owner, it seems counterintuitive that by maintaining or improving the building, it has been ruined by historic designation purposes. This might seem like an oversimplification, but it is essentially the message we are delivering. When we, meaning us, historic preservation commissioners and professionals, use the term integrity to explain this, it can be offensive to hear that your property doesn't have enough of it to make the cut. It becomes one of the narratives used to label preservationists as out of touch with reality, aka hysterical preservationists, who are always saying no to change. These negative narratives matter, especially when they become embedded as public opinion, as they have often in this town, and are shared by the media and influence decision makers. According to the National Register criteria for listing, quote unquote, historic places either retain integrity, that is, they convey their significance, or they do not, period. We leave ourselves no middle ground. This focus on a subjective yet rigid definition of the material aspects of integrity turns historic places from things that are venerated with the stories they can tell into things that are precious. This culture of preciousness elevates historic material as the deciding factor of what gets saved and what does not. So there's a lot more to this story, but I think it's a dialogue that is pertinent to Palm Springs. So I'll send you all the article and I hope that you'll read it. And maybe we can have some discussion about it at the next meeting or a future meeting. So with that, if no one has any further board member comments, I'll turn it over to staff.
Well, I just have a couple items to discuss. The first one is for the November meeting, our meeting is actually scheduled on election day, November 5th. And so we would like to entertain a couple of alternative dates to meet. If possible, we would like to schedule it to either November 6th, the day after, or the Thursday on the 7th. We did confirm that the council chambers will be available for us to reschedule for that time, so we'd like to see if that works for our board members. And we would entertain a 5:30 start time.
Could you restate those?
November 6th or the 7th, so it'd be the Wednesday or Thursday.
Well, I think the 6th is too soon. I'll either be celebrating or suicidal.
I agree.
I mean, take an extra day.
So the 6th or the 7th? On the 7th, I have to go to Sacramento for the state commission meeting, which is scheduled a year in advance, so
So if we could just go around the table, remember Anthony proposed the 6th.
6th.
Member Lucy,
7th.
7. I can do either day, the 6th or 7th in the evening.
I prefer the 6th.
Member Air.
Either one.
Oh, I'm sorry, Member Buckman.
That's all right, either one, it's fine.
Well, either is fine.
You do? Okay.
That's it. If I'm ill, I won't be able to make it, so.
Or dead.
Maybe mentally ill. Hope so.
So it sounds like we have consensus for the 6th. So we'll go ahead and, what we need to do is cancel our regular meeting for the 5th, and then we will schedule a special meeting for, cancel the regular meeting for the 5th, and then set up a second meeting for the 6th, and then we'll go ahead and I'll email everyone about those details, but we will actually be meeting in the council chambers. Because this room is being used by different board or commissions. I will send out the details, and then obviously we'll state that we'll be meeting in the city council chambers.
Well, had I known that, you know, you feel a lot more important when you're in the council chambers than this table. So that did change my mind.
And are you talking about the same time?
Yes, 5:30.
So to put clarification, that would be called a special meeting?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
The next thing I wanted to check was we had assigned everyone a city's email. And I know that our administrative staff has been communicating through the city email. Has everyone been able to set that up, and is anyone having any troubles accessing their email account?
I have not been able to get that icon on my desktop yet. I have been away, and so I will call that technical number tomorrow for assistance.
I'm gonna need it.
I'm trying to check it more often.
Me too.
I've got 5 email addresses.
What's the place that it was recommended that we look to see the materials? There's the email and then there's a separate.
So it's under SharePoint.
How do I forgot the SharePoint link? How do
I think it's incorporated in the instructions, yeah, but I can send that to you, and then if you are having issues with accessing SharePoints, I know internally. It can be a little bit tricky, and if you're not used to it, there's a lot of, it feels like a lot of steps, but I can send that to you, and then. I will check in with everyone just to see if everyone has access, and I know eventually they want to use the SharePoints to access all of our materials and just send the link. So in the next week or so, you want to go ahead and try setting up the emails if you haven't. If you run into issues, please reach out to me. I can put you in connection. Right.
Just,
Captain?
sorry, thank you. So just added to that, there is a way that you can put the link onto your desktop so that you can access it more easily.
SharePoint?
Yeah.
An iMac?
Yeah, you just like, it's like a file, you can like add it as basically just a file on your desktop,
Okay.
essentially,
Oh, good.
and it'll like open it up right there.
And Anita Field, who I think a lot of you have engaged with, can assist with that, or at least liaise between us and IT on how to do that.
Then the last thing was the update that we have about the last thing, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, the last thing that we have here is an update on a project related to City Hall, and our director will give us a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, so you may have seen it in the city council agenda and the discussion that happened at the last city council meeting last Thursday night. But I think the city council had asked us quite some time ago to look at turf conversion here at City Hall, at getting rid of some of the turf that's happening. There's a whole series of reasons for this that are fairly obvious. Most importantly, I think, in addition to just needing to be better about water conservation, there is law coming down from the state that is really going to significantly shift water usage in the desert, and is going to require a significant reduction in water use, particularly around non-functional turf, which of course most of the grass around City Hall is. Of course, our partners at the Desert Water Agency have been asking us to do this for quite some time. If you've ever driven by here in the middle of the day, you'll see the sprinklers on, which is contrary to, I think, DWA's policies and just how we should be as good water users. So we actually commissioned Steve Kalon to look at a report looking at the history of the landscaping here at City Hall, and I think certainly Sarah and Ken can speak to this in a much more eloquent and better way than I can, but I think we were surprised to see that the landscape was actually originally designed by ECBO and was originally installed as desert landscaping. And so the turf was kind of added on after the construction of City Hall and was not sort of part of the original design of City Hall. And there's some really excellent photos in the report that is included with the City Council package, which either Sarah can circulate or you can just find it online if you look at last week's council agenda. And so we had kind of done a rough order of magnitude on what that cost would be to look at tearing up that turf and restoring it. There was also just some other interesting landscaping features that were here originally. There was a sort of some interesting mounding in the front lawn of City Hall and a few other features. There were some pockets of turf, so we're looking at how we could incorporate, I believe the term is hybrid turf, which uses a significantly lower amount of water. And so all of that is kind of in play. And long story short, the rough order of magnitude was somewhere close to $750,000. And City Council was enthusiastic about us proceeding with costing that out a little bit more and proceeding with developing a scope of work for that. They also included in part of their discussion and direction to staff a couple of additional items. I think there have been concerns over the last year or so about the lighting in the parking lot. It's not the original lighting that was installed with City Hall. Some of it is non-functional, and so after meetings at this time of year, especially as we're starting to get darker, I think there are some safety concerns in the parking lot. So we are going to look at how we can improve safety by looking at the lighting in the parking lot as part of that process as well. And then I think council was certainly looking for us to look at ways of using this as kind of an example or educational opportunity for city residents to, and particularly our large, HOAs and others who have a lot of turf who haven't necessarily gotten into the turf conversion program that both DWA and the city partner on offering funding for, to show them ways that you can go from turf to desert native landscaping in a really nice and beautiful way. And so looking at what educational opportunities might be available through that. We partnered obviously with our sustainability department on that, and we'll be working with our public works and engineering department on proceeding again with a scope for that. I think as that scope sort of moves forward and as we have a better understanding of everything that we're looking to do for that, that will obviously determine sort of what historic level of review is needed for given that it is a class 1 property. And so I think we'll have more to say on that with this group as that scope is kind of refined and as we move further into that process. But it is exciting to look at ways to restore the landscaping here back to what it used to be, while also meeting some of our broader sustainability and climate objectives. So excited about that.
Quick question on that. So this project would apply to all of the landscape area on the entire City Hall ground, not just the current turf area, correct?
That's correct. So we had, as part of it, I think we identified 6 phases in the report, and part of that was just the differences in the landscaping. I think as part of the so the rear portions of City Hall, I don't want to misspeak, but there is something in the way that City Hall was designated that I think differentiated the front lawn from the rear lawns. So a bit of it was that, and a bit of it was just cost. So we wanted to give City Council the option of directing us based on where they felt they could direct funds, on whether they wanted to phase the project and have us focus on specific areas, or whether they wanted us to do it all. In their direction to us, they wanted us to do it all. So we'll be proceeding with a plan for all of the landscaping and all of the turf around City Hall, including the north, east, and west sides of City Hall as well.
I take it that this probably is going to go into a planting season a year from now, not this.
I would imagine that we need to, there'll be some work that needs to happen internally to scope this out, go out for bids, all of that stuff will take some time to develop the scope, the cost, get all of those approvals. We'll have to return to City Hall. There'll likely be a conversation here with this group. So I don't see this proceeding too soon. So you're right. We will have to then, based on that timing, look at the appropriate time.
Thank you. So, is there anything further?
That concludes our staff comments for today.
Okay, did anyone have any further questions for Christopher related to that? No? Okay, good. Wonderful. All right, so I guess being no further discussion, Some of our favorite topics of the meeting here. I will adjourn this meeting of the HSPB to our rescheduled special meeting of Tuesday, November 6th, 2024.
Wednesday, November sixth.
Oh, my apologies. That's correct. Wednesday, November 6th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. in City Council chambers. And I look forward to seeing most everyone there that night. And hopefully we'll be celebrating. Thank you all for your participation today.
Thank you.